everyone. I'm happy to see everybody in here. It's standing room only, and I'm excited when that happens. My name is Mike Elsmeyer. I'm director of the Communication Research Center. And we host every semester one distinguished scholar to come and share with us the research that they're working on. And I want to basically thank Dr. Mina Tsai-Fogel for coordinating this particular series of distinguished scholars. We are very lucky and fortunate and privileged to have with us today Professor Esther Thorson. Professor Thorson is Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research and Director of Research for the Reynolds Journalism Institute at the University of Missouri. She holds a PhD in psychology. In a 2010 research productivity paper, Thorson was reported to be the second most productive research scholar in advertising across 290 research journals. How about that? She has directed 43 doctoral dissertations, with one of her students winning the Netziger White Selwyn Best Dissertation Award at the Association for Educational Journalism and Mass Communication, and two of her students winning the American Academy of Advertising Stock Doctoral Dissertation Proposals. She's been awarded more than $4 million in external research funding. She's published more than 100 journal articles, including in the top 3 marketing journals and most of the top communication and advertising journals. She is completing her 12th and 13th edited books. Her research ranges from the theory of public health-based news reporting to financial modeling of newspaper revenues to emotional theory about the impact of television commercials. She is not only an academic, but she also has consulted with advertising agencies, especially DDB in Chicago, as well as with newspapers from the Los Angeles Times to the Seattle Times to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch to the Jacksonville Times-Union. Today, she will be talking about a new theory of how consumers process ethically compromised television commercials. Please help me welcome Dr. Thorson.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Can you guys all hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thank you so much for getting out in this weather. I left Columbia, Missouri a couple of days ago. It was 75. It was sunny. I watched television. It said there was something called a nor'easter that was going to hit Boston, and I really didn't know what that meant, but now both my hair and I know that. So anyway, it's been exciting the last day or so. I am so glad to be giving a lecture that honors Melvin Defleur, who was and remains a major contributor to our understanding of all kinds of mass media processes. His work with Sandra Ball-Rokeach is legendary, and so I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm very, very honored to be giving a lecture in Dr. Defleur's name. Thank you all for getting out in this weather. I want to talk to you today about how people understand commercials. I've been studying TV commercials for many, many years, and I usually study them from the point of view of the producer, of the advertiser. So, for example, we show commercials about Kellogg's Rice Krispies. We say, you know, do you like Rice Krispies? Do you like this ad? Do you intend to buy some? Et cetera, et cetera. So we're very focused on the message having an impact on people. And that pretty much works. In fact, in the what's called the information processing literature, that's this literature that really focuses on the message having the impact on people, the very best predictor of how a TV commercial does nationally in the market is what's called attitude toward the ad. How much you like it, how much you say you like it. So that system worked very, very well until more recently, a research group that I've put together at Mizzou, and I want to mention my colleagues here, Margaret Duffy, who's a colleague of mine, Anna Kim, Heesuk Choi, Tatiana Karaliova, and Sung-Kyung Kim are all doctoral students that work with me at Mizzou. and have been very instrumental in this research. So it's a series of studies. It's by no means completed, so I'm really looking for some good ideas from you all, because actually our research started with people just like yourselves. What we were interested in knowing was what do people do when they watch a commercial that has been criticized by our society as problematic in some ways. And so we had all kinds of examples of that. So we had Huggies diapers referring to them as being full. We had Keystone beer. You probably know Keystone, who is kind of a Neanderthal guy. And he is, in this one particular ad we showed, he's hitting on this jilted bride who's sobbing because her husband left her, her fiancé left her at the altar. Unfair ads to kids, Bratz dolls who actually sing and dance and so on, leading to unrealistic expectations on the parts of children. Unsafe speed, one that is always amazing to me, personal care products like Cialis, which is a remedy for impotence, and has a tagline which is, actually it's a warning, not a tagline, that says essentially if you have an erection lasting more than 4 hours, you should call your doctor. So for a lot of people, those kinds of ads are, they should not be in American living rooms, at least during times when children are around or when more sensitive adults are around. So our research group a couple of years ago took a whole bunch of these problematic ads, and we took some non-problematic ads, and we brought in one at a time lots of college students. And we had them watch the ads, and we just said, we did not load them up. We didn't say, do you see a problem with this ad? We just said, tell us what thoughts and feelings went through your mind when you watched it. Well, lo and behold, not a single one of them ever mentioned a problem. So, for example, on Cialis, they would be like, well, isn't that cute? They show them together in the bathtub. I would be like, could you tell us more about that? Oh, yeah, it was fine. Everything was fine. Insults to women, use of women's bodies to sell brands. Insults to minorities, no problem. So we got to thinking, why is that? You know, we had various hypotheses about that. We got to thinking, well, you know, today's youth, 18 to 24, are people who live in a very diverse culture, and they have learned, perhaps, that relativism is a really important philosophy, that anything goes. Like, I have my way of living, you have your way of living, and it's all okay. And that kind of attitude, of course, would lead to nothing bothering anybody in terms of these commercials. But when we gave these students adjective checklists that includes all kinds of things like funny, interesting, arousing, controversial, problematic, stereotypes people, then we found that these very same college students were very willing to put negative adjectives on the problematic commercials. So it was happening someplace in their brains. Examples would include these kinds of adjectives. They were very, very high for all the problematic ads we watched, even though the students watched, even though they never said a word about it. So then we also looked at their response to adjectives that were positive, factual, believable, informative. And, you know, they gave good scores to the problematic ads and to the non-problematic ads. Okay, so although they were picking up some negative responses, they were pretty willing to say that ads that had some negative aspects that could be ethically problematic they were not going to mention it, but they were going to put positive adjectives and negative adjectives on them. So they also said entertaining, amusing. Again, no difference in the troubled ads and the non-troubled ads. Okay. Now, so this is in spite of the fact, you know, when you guys are a little bit older and you have spent a lot of years, as I have, looking at communication literature, one of the things you find is that people say that ethical judgments are consistently important for global ad evaluations, right? So the assumption in the advertising industry is don't run a problematic ad. You probably saw the little plastic dolls that are from Breaking Bad, you know, the little drug dealers out of plastic that are sold to kids. You know, they're holding little bags of money and little sacks of meth. And so you'd be like, I don't think I'm going to get that for my 5-year-old for Christmas, you know? I don't see it. And yet, when this was first brought up by an activist from Florida, I think it was Mothers Against Drug Dealing Dolls or something like that, Toys R Us said, you know, we don't sell this to children. We only sell it to those 15 or above. So you'd be like, oh, well, that solves it, right? Let's just give the little plastic drug dealing dolls to teenagers. So anyway, there's a lot of problems with trying to sell a brand that's problematic ethically. So we decided, and this is the part that gets kind of, is a little pedantic, but this is important, I think, for your understanding of where we're thinking commercials get processed. Okay, there's constructionist theory is basically a very different theory than I've ever worked with before. Constructionists, and you've probably run into this if you've taken your beginning comm theory classes, excuse me. Constructionists talk about how every single one of us approaches anything, any person, any mediated message from the point of view of deriving meaning for it from our own idiosyncratic, culturally embedded point of view, right? So any two people, like this gentleman here or you here in the white vest, when you look at any commercial, you interpret it differently. You interpret it in terms of your own experience. Well, that's very different from talking about information processing, which assumes that we encode that selling message into a TV commercial, and then it goes right out from that commercial to people, affects them, makes them like the brand, and makes them want to buy the brand. Okay, so you can kind of nod your head if you see what I'm talking about. On one hand, we have theory that says the person is the most important element in the processing, bringing their own perspective to the interpretation. And on the other hand, on the other side of the theoretical fence, we have people who say what's really important is the message that is encoded into that commercial. And it's the message that's most important. So in this theory that we're trying to develop now, what we want to do is combine those. And I'm going to refer you to, there's lots and lots of meaning-oriented theories that are out in communication. I'm going to refer just to one, this Mick and Buell, 1992, long time ago. And what they basically did is they looked at 3 brothers. They showed them all the same commercials. These guys are brothers, okay? And they're all males, obviously. And they asked them what commercials meant. They showed them a commercial. What's it mean? They showed them another commercial. What's it mean? And they found completely different interpretations. So what you see represented here is that your personal history leads you to process this ad according to your idiosyncrasies. That leads you to have meanings, and then those meanings feed back into your life. So this is a very different approach, right? It says, look, you're showing me this Rice Krispie ad because you want to sell me Rice Krispies. But you're not watching it because you want to buy Rice Krispies. You're buying it because you want to find meanings, okay? And sometimes your meaning is you just want to leave the room, right? So you can avoid the ad, and that's perfectly all right and makes a lot of sense. So, one of the things that we know is that commercials do have an effect on people. If you ask an ordinary person, if I ask any one of you in this room, do commercials affect you, what would you say? You'd say, well, you say yes because you're smart and you're in communication, right? But ordinary people would say no. Commercials do not affect me. Do commercials affect other people? Oh, yes, they do. Yes. And so what we find out when we talk to ordinary people about all kinds of messages, but certainly commercials, is that they feel they're invulnerable to them, and they feel that they know how they work. And in fact, this theory, persuasion knowledge theory, which I recommend to you, basically is the study of how people develop all of their own personal theories about how mass media messages affect them. And then they operate on those theories. So those are two really important concepts. So our theory is what was labeled all the way back in '99 as mutualist. So mutualist theory says, you know what? Both of these pressures work, and they come together in people's heads and lead to a very unique form of commercial processing. And we posit that the perceiving ethical issues is in that mix. And it doesn't always appear when you interview people because they're busy telling you what that commercial means from their own individual cultural perspective. So what I'm going to show you now is what we're doing. We've gone through several iterations of this. We've tested college students, we've tested American adults to try to figure out what does a mutualist theory look like, and how does it help us understand how ads work, commercials work, and particularly how ethically challenged commercials work. So here's what we do, and I'm going to have you be my subjects in a minute. We show the commercials and ask what thoughts and feelings go through your minds. This allows people to tell us their meaning interpretations. They can say anything they want to us. Then we do all this information processing kind of testing. We ask them closed-ended questions because now we're looking for the impact of that particular commercial, and we're also looking at the impact of these two kinds of assumptions about the ethics that one owns. One is realism. I'll talk to you a little bit more about this in a minute. Relativism, excuse me. And that's this kind of, you know, what's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is what's good for me. And then there's idealism. And idealism essentially is the belief that there is a right and there is a wrong. And this is true for all people, for all cultures, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out that nobody's one or the other. We're all a blend of those two, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept. This is an information processing concept. It's called Generalized Attitude toward the ad. It is a measure of your belief that commercials are either evil processes or that they have some good. And I'm going to show you how we measure that in just a second. So we predicted, I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but these are the kinds of things that we predicted. I've talked about what these measures look like, and I've talked to you also about this. I'm going to go over this slide a little bit more, though, just so you're ready to be subjects in my experiment. So the idea in social constructionism is that you bring all of your personal experience to a commercial and interpret it in that light, and then you're done with it. On the other hand, all kinds of other processes that are stimulated by that commercial itself are involved, and that impact of the encoding of those messages actually affects you, even though you might not be terribly aware of it. So this is the model that we're going to test, and now I'm going to show you some ads. Oops.
from messy.
Who said salads can't be hot? The new cranberry apple walnut grilled chicken salad. One of 3 new premium salads at Carl's Jr.
Doesn't that make you want salad? Okay, so this is one of a number of commercials that we showed to our, these are adult subjects across the nation. And you can see the variety of responses, okay? These people were looking at the same commercial, but they were interpreting it differently. Very attractive celebrity, sexually appealing, salad looks good, right? And then, I love this one. Makes me want a salad from Carl's Jr., makes me want to jump in a bubble bath and eat salad, right? Of course. But then here is a person who's offended, okay? This person thinks that this is a disgusting ad, and in fact, adds this. If these ads would be unacceptable if it was men in the same position, okay? So she or he is making some decisions about that commercial. Okay, so here's another one.
Tasting sugar-free from Mountain Dew. The energizing taste of awesome.
Makes perfect sense, right? I love it. Okay, so here is sample responses to this one. Funny and awesome video. I felt energized watching it. How many of you felt that way? Oh, the brave ones are raising their hands. That's good. Okay. I thought it was totally irresponsible on many different levels. It perpetuates the notion that when you're young, you're indestructible. We both know this is not the case. It also shows someone spewing their Mountain Dew at the end on their friends, and that stuff is so sticky, they'll have to take a bath. Really? This must have been a mom or a dad, I'm not sure. And this one I love. Now, this is classic constructionism. I thought about the dangerous activity. I couldn't help but wonder how the spill from the balloon would affect the plants. What plants? There was no plants in that commercial, okay? So you'd be like, okay. One more.
Nice shirt.
How many of you have seen that before? Anybody? One or two of you, okay. So here's a sample response to this. Now this is not, we did not plan this one to be an ethically troubled commercial, although some people interpreted it that way. But this is from a set of commercials that we showed people called public service announcements, PSAs. And PSAs, public service announcements, are commercials that are designed to lead people to healthier lives. So anti-smoking, safe sex, non-bullying, safe driving. These are all PSAs. And PSAs we want to have in here because they have this very funny impact on people. Whereas everyone says commercials do not affect them, they just affect others. With PSAs, it turns around. So for a PSA, if I said, did that affect you? You would say yes. Does that affect the person sitting next to you? Oh, I'm afraid not. That person is not quite that sensitive as I am, doesn't really want to lead the same kind of life that I do, etc. So PSAs are really important because they have socially positive features that make people want to think that they themselves are affected by them and others are not. So here's the sample of responses. I sort of hoped it was going to turn into a Mormon ad, and the girls who looked like they were going to be bullies would turn out to be sweet and helpful. I was wrong, sad. Okay, so I mean, an interesting and unique response. Look at this one. Oh God, this is going to be a bullying commercial. I'm so sick of having this shoved down my throat. Kids need to stop being so sensitive. School sucks and kids are mean. That's it, get over it. It doesn't mean anything. Okay? I mean, could you get more two different responses than those two? I don't think so. So, first of all, we got these open-ended responses. Then we gave people all these closed-ended tests, and I'm going to go over these again in a real quick way, but just to make sure that you understand what mental processes they are designed to measure. Idealism scale, realism scale, I'm going to show you those in a minute. Affect. Remember I told you that the biggest predictor of how well a commercial performs in the marketplace is how you feel when you watch it. So think about how you felt when you watch each of those three ads I just showed you. Positive affect predicts high impact in the marketplace. Arousal. Arousal is your feeling of excitement, of being energized. Arousal typically also has a positive effect, but you're not going to see that here. It's going to behave differently. And then this is generalized attitude toward the ad, either positive or negative. And overall, we gave people those adjective checklists I showed you earlier. So for every single commercial, we had how many positive ads you chose and how many negative ads you showed. So now keep this in mind. This is the fundamental thing to understanding this thing. Every message produces in you a good response, a liking response, and a disliking response. The overall impact of advertising depends on the bringing of those two together. Now I'm going to show you how that works. So here are the positive ads. I thought, how, on a 9-point scale, how informative, believable, important, and realistic was this commercial? We asked this for all the commercials, all three types. Negative ads, negative adjectives, offensive, controversial. 9-point scale. Now here's an example of idealism scales. I want you to look at these items and say, how much would you agree with each one of them? Risk to another should never be tolerated, irrespective of how small the risks might be. That's an absolute. So that's a statement of how things should be ethically, regardless of differences in culture, differences in gender, differences in income, education, etc. And so those are all three examples of realism scale items. This is relativism. Ask yourself how much you agree with each of these. There are no ethical principles that are so important that they should be a part of any code of ethics. So that's the belief that there is no right that's right for everyone. Okay? So it's ethics for these people. Ethics in this realm of theory is a relative issue. Here's how we measured affect. When you watched the ad, how happy, pleased, and satisfied were you? And this is how we measured arousal. How aroused, how excited, and stimulated did you feel? These are a positive attitude toward the ad items. We've known about attitude toward the ad since 1989, and these are highly predictive of how people respond to commercials. Advertising provides essential information. So that's a positive view. Advertising can be entertaining. Another example of a positive statement. These are negative beliefs about ads. Advertising exploits people's emotions, fears, and desires. Advertising often makes people feel bad about their looks and bodies. Okay, so these are negative views of the role of advertising in our society. Now, we had 3 kinds of ads. We had 4 of each. We had these ads that were incredibly dangerous. I don't know if you've seen this Reebok ad, but these 2 guys are having a jump off the bridge on a bungee cord contest. And one is wearing Reeboks, and one is wearing some unknown brand. And they both jump, and the guy wearing the Reeboks, you know, he's bouncing, and the other guy, it's just the pair of shoes. He's gone. Really? This is an ad, like, makes me want to buy Reeboks. Anyway, so these all show really dangerous behaviors, and they show them in a way that comes out bad. Positive views are just about the same as negative views. So it's just even Steven. Well, it's kind of not good, but it was pretty exciting to see it. Now look at the PSAs. This is on a 9-point scale. So these are real high. They're very positive about it. Lower negatives. There is some negative there, but lower negative. So the PSAs, just like what we expected, people feel really good on the good side and not much bad on the bad side. But look at these losers. Positive views in the basement, negative views high. So overall, across all these Americans that we sampled, the sexy ads got way lower positive views and way higher negative views. Now, I have these next 3 slides just so you can see how smart I am, and then I can do statistics, right? So the only thing I'm going to say about these slides is that this number, this R-squared number, varies between 0 and 1.00. And the higher it is, that means the closer the match between your model and reality. So a 68.3%, real high. So that means we're very good at predicting dangerous ads from the variables that I just talked to you about. This is sexual ads. R-squared, 0.59. It's good, pretty good, not as good. And then look at this one. Still good, still significant for the PSAs, but only 1/3 of the variance. So we're not nearly as good at being able to predict how people are going to respond to these ads that attempt to get people to change their behaviors to make the world a better place. But here are the interesting and challenging things. I want to go through these a little bit slowly because I want you to think, because this next part is going to be your chance to help me with this. All right? So the mutualist model appears to work. And how do we know that? Because the idiosyncratic meaning-making response to these commercials was very high. I've shown you some of the examples. If you read through the hundreds of them, as we did, you'd be like, wow, are these people from the same planet? They are very idiosyncratic in their interpretations. Secondly, the impact of the variables that we measured that are information processing variables demonstrate that when people look at different kinds of commercials, the components that create their final response, how much they like it and how much they dislike it, are a complex mixture. It's not nearly as simple as we used to think that it was. Now let's look at the effect of each of these variables. Idealism increases your positive views of PSAs. So what does that mean? If the higher your idealism score is, the more you think there's certain right that is right for everybody, the more you like PSAs. Okay, now that kind of makes sense because you're an idealist, you think there is a right and wrong, so you like it when commercials focus on that right and wrong. Relativism. The more you're a relativist, the less negative your evaluation of those sexy ads. This makes sense, right? So you look at it and you're like, you know, I got a kind of a funny feeling about selling salad with Kim Kardashian, but different strokes for different folks, right? So your relativism makes you more accepting of ethically compromised commercials. Makes sense to me. But it increases your positive views of dangerous ads. And again, this kind of makes sense too. So you think about this guy jumping off and hitting a Mountain Dew balloon and thinking that that was cool and appropriate behavior, but you're a relativist. Oh, that's okay. It's okay for him to do that. It's okay for people to, drive really fast on rain-slicked highways, etc., because you're a relativist. The more you're a relativist, the more you're accepting. We asked people to respond to these two words, sexy and dangerous. Sexy, the more people said sexy about those ads that relied on sexual representation of women connected with brands, the more they didn't like them. And we suspect that this indicates a recognition of the ethical problems with using women and women's bodies to sell brands. Dangerous didn't do a darn thing. Now these are interesting. The more you have a positive view of advertising in general, so this is like advertising tells me important things about the world, it teaches me to know about new brands and stuff like that, the more you liked all those commercials. So that makes a lot of sense, right? People who think that advertising is a good thing in our society, they're going to be more accepting of almost anything you hand out to them. And that was the case here. And likewise, the more you have a positive view of advertising in general, the less negative you are about everything. So it makes you like the ads and have less dislike for the ads. So it's just kind of your philosophy of commercials. If you have a negative view of advertising in general, it increases your positive views of the PSAs. Now, what does this one mean? I'm not entirely sure, but here's what I think. If you think advertising in general is a bad thing for society, and then along comes a PSA that tells you to have safe sex, or don't drink and drive, or don't bully, you're like, wow, that's kind of unusual for that nasty advertising to do something good, and you like it more. I think that's what's going on there. And how this makes perfect sense with old research, how positive you feel while watching the ads. Doesn't matter what the ad is. Could be anything. Excuse me. If you feel positive, you like the ad. And what that shows is your fundamental positive affect thing that you have going on inside yourself all the time drives your perceptions. That's an extremely important kind of thing to know about. How aroused you are is very different. If you're aroused, that increases your positive feelings about all the commercials. But if you're aroused while watching, it reduces the negative views of the sexy ads. So if you were, I'm just going to not say that this happened, but if you were turned on by Kim Kardashian, you were aroused, you like the ad better. But if you were aroused by the guy jumping off and hitting the Mountain Dew balloon, you like it less. Okay, you have a hypothesis, don't you? Yeah, interesting. So, bottom line, the response to a commercial is partly you and it's partly the commercial. And it is a complex blend of the two that we don't yet understand very well. But I want to suggest to you that we should not give all the power to the message side, because people are bringing to that message what is important to them, and what the meaning is of that message, just above and beyond the fact that it's trying to sell you a product or trying to tell you how to lead a safer life. I also want to say to you, and people that have known me for a long time will say, wow, I never thought I'd hear her say that. We've got to use both qualitative and quantitative theory and methods to get at it. Now, as you go through your curriculum, you'll find that there's two camps. You know, there's the qualitative camp, we just need to talk to people, do depth interviews, you know, do naturalistic observation. And then there's a quantitative camp that wants to give people closed-ended questions, add them all up, do some statistics, and come to a conclusion. You have to do them both, particularly when you're looking at something as complex as a TV commercial. And of course, this extends to what if you're trying to look at the impact of a documentary film or a movie or a newspaper story. Those are way more complex than a 30-second commercial. So it's even way more true, I think, for them. And I think that most of the research that we have done on how people process ethically challenged commercials has been done from the information processing point of view. It is message-centered, and it led to the conclusion that all people are sensitive to ethical infractions in messages. That just is not true. Okay? So I think this approach can give us a much deeper understanding of how people deal with ethical issues, representations of others, representation of things that could be personally offensive to individuals, and so on and so forth. What we're going to do next is we're taking all of our hundreds of open-ended responses and we're coding them as positive, negative, or neutral. And then we're going to try to take all of those quantitative methods and predict the meaning responses. I think we're going to be able to do it. I'm sorry, I don't know yet, but we're working on it. And then what we want to do is also test a lot more different kinds of commercials. You know, how does a Cialis commercial, or you know, any impotence product, or personal care product that's fairly repulsive, I mean, how do people process those messages? You know, how do they work their wiles, and what do people do with them? The end. So there's a long way to go on this issue. There's lots and lots of questions. You people are some of the folks that have to watch these commercials all the time. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yes?
You said that negative views. The adjective sexy drove up the negative views.
So what was the second part of your question? I didn't hear it.
The adjective sexy drove up negative views in yours.
Yeah. So there's a different, that's a great question. She said, you know, what is wrong with you, lady? You said sexy makes, if you say the ad was sexy, you like it less, which is true. But if you were aroused, you like it more. So what is the inconsistency there? Here's my theory about that. Do you have a theory?
Well, because how you feel in the moment when you're watching the commercial really affects how you think that and how it affects you. But then when you hear like the reality of the commercial sexy, then you're like, oh no, I guess that's bad.
I agree with that 100%. You are going to go far. That's really good. So what she said, if you didn't hear that, is that look, you're just watching a commercial. You know, you don't realize that some crazy woman from Missouri is watching you watch the commercial. And so you're like, whoa, that is turning me on, okay? And so you like the commercial. But when you see that word sexy, it cues you because you're like, oh, you know, I think I read someplace in my freshman class on diversity that you're not supposed to use women's bodies to sell products. That must be what they mean. And so you make that you make a cognitive interpretation. So your physiology is saying yes, and your cognition, as usual, is saying no. And I think that's exactly what that is. Very, very good question. Others? Yeah.
If it has sort of a negative connotation, why do you think sex is used so prevalently to sell everything?
You know, that is a humdinger of a question. She said, if sexy ads get such a negative response as we saw from this thing, why do people use them all the time? I'm going to give you a chance to answer first. What do you think?
It's easy.
It's easy. I mean, who doesn't want to watch a beautiful woman eat a salad in bed, you know? But it's arousing, right? So when you're sitting at home watching commercials, there's nobody testing you, right? And so if a significant portion of the population is actually aroused by that, you know, they're like, oh, that is so dumb, Carl's Jr. selling salad with Kim Kardashian. But what really operates there is that physiological response. And that's why those ads work so well, I believe. And that's why, you know, there's hundreds of articles, scholarly articles that say, don't sell product with sex. You know, and then you go out in the real world and I say, don't sell product with sex. And they're like, are you crazy? Right? Because they know it works. And it's the arousal phenomenon. So that's a good, insightful question. Other questions? Don't be shy. Yes?
So you're saying that the feeling of arousal can be like in a positive mood, you feel positive and you feel positive about the product. Exactly.
And you don't, you know, when people, you know, what this has taught me after testing people for years for all kinds of companies to see what ads work and what ads don't, is we put words in people's mouths, right? We had them do those adjective checklists. We ask them, is it right to sell product with women's bodies? Is it right to show people who are vulnerable to the suggestion that they should show really dangerous behaviors and not worry about it at all? Are we right to sell brands that way? And people would always say no. And so we're like, oh, thank goodness. People are so rational. But it was wrong, right? Because that meaning analysis is what we do when we watch TV. We don't answer an adjective checklist questionnaire, right? And that's why I think it's so important for us to look at both of them. Yeah.
We tried actually not doing, I guess, to a certain extent, the kinds of measures that people are aware of, but more physiological measures to see whether actually arousal, physiological is essentially kind of capturing your level of arousal without being asked.
Yes, I have, and at Missouri we have a big physio lab. So we hook people up and we look at their pulse and blood pressure, and we look at their pupillary expansion, and we look at measures of arousal, and then we show them commercials. And or we do other things to them. And those physiological measures are highly predictive, just as you expect, because they are generally not driven by cognition. I want to give you an interesting example of that, because the cell phone, I know to most of you, is like part of your right hand, or your left hand, depending on which you are. So we took people, college students, and we put them in the physio room, and we hooked them all up. And then we said, we're going to show you some commercials. And then we said, you know, but we can't have your cell phone right here because it interferes with the signaling. So we're going to put it right over here. So don't mess with it or anything like that. Just watch the commercials, respond to the commercials, et cetera, et cetera. Then we got their cell phone to ring, but they couldn't answer it. And those physiological responses went off the charts, you know? And we were like, did you just see that commercial? What did you think of it? And they were like, you know, I think my phone is ringing. You know, it was great. So I think those physiological measures, they're very, very helpful, particularly in looking at how we really feel.
In those physiological situations, when you are in the lab and then you know that
Yes, no, they do. And so what we do is we let them sort of adjust to the room for a while. You know, it looks like a little living room, and they just sit there and do various and sundry things. I mean, when you have like 42 electrodes pasted onto your scalp, it's a little hard to act natural, right? But, you know, you would be surprised after about 10 minutes of just having them sit there, or maybe they can read the paper or do whatever they're doing, talking on the cell phones, all their physio measures start to look sort of normal, and then we can show them the stimulus. Yeah. It's not perfect, but it's good. Yeah.
For the adjective list, why is controversial on the negative side? Because couldn't a controversial ad still like elicit a positive response from the viewer?
You know, that's a very good question. I believe it's appropriate to put it on the negative because it lines up with all these other negative adjectives. And I think when people say, oh, that ad is controversial, it's a very cognitive, rational kind of thing to say, but I think what it means is people know there's something wrong with that ad. Yeah. Yeah.
You were talking about feeling aroused and its effect on the commercials. Why would you think that feeling aroused during the commercial increases the negative use of a dangerous commercial?
That's very good. So the question was, if arousal has a positive effect in general on liking for the commercial, why does it have a negative effect on watching those negative ads? My guess, anybody want to make a guess before I guess? You guys are good at this. My guess is that when you have felt aroused, you have some real good idea about what caused it, right? It was like, uh-oh, something bad is going to happen. Like, I cannot watch a bungee jumping video without feeling terrified. I mean, is there any kind of a video that you guys can watch that doesn't just, you know, that's not dangerous behavior that really doesn't scare you? I mean, we just feel scared when we see some people risking their lives for something that's idiotic, right? And so I think when you felt aroused like that, what that says is people realized they were fearful. And if you're fearful, you're like, maybe he shouldn't jump, right? So that's kind of my theory about what's going on there.
I've been noticing, like, in a lot of current music videos, they'll put, like, these headphones, like, kind of sneak it into the commercial. And I guess definitely for the advertiser, do you find that that is more effective than just a commercial on TV, if they just kind of put it within a TV?
Sneak it in there. So it's called a product placement. Yeah. How many of you have seen a product placement in actual movies? Okay, just about everybody, right? Those work 10 times better, literally 10 times better, because most people, when they're watching a movie and they see a brand in there, they don't think ad. Most people think it is so cool that George Clooney is drinking Coke, right? And once you think that, you're deader than a doornail, right? You're going to be like, he drinks Coke, I'm drinking Coke, right? So I think that's why product placements do so well. How many of you in here are in PR? All right, lots of you, good. So if you put a brand in a news story, it works 15 times better than a commercial for that brand for the exact same reason, right? That's a newspaper journalist telling me about this brand. He or she has no reason to try to convince me. They're just trying to share the product characteristics with me. Yeah. So the power of advertising is you can buy it and put it on there, and it works. It's good. The power of PR is you're sneaking it to people. And the power of product placements is the same thing. So it is not read as something that's attempting to persuade you. Yeah?
What do you think of the recent trend of companies using like PSAs to sell their product, like the Always Like a Girl campaign? Do you think that affects the company and the way people perceive it?
Yes, I do. So where they are saying like, all women are beautiful, brought to you by whatever. It's extremely effective because it's in the guise of a PSA. It's in the guise of, you know, we're all beautiful people, which is a great message. And when you ask people what that is that a commercial? They say no. That's life training, right? If you can just, I mean, I've been in advertising all these years, but if you can make people think it's not an ad, you are home free, right? It's because of that third person effect. That doesn't affect me. I'm not going to let it affect me. I understand what they're trying to do to me, right? And nobody wants to experience that. Nobody wants to be persuaded. Like let's say you got a boyfriend, you want him to, pop the question. If you say, honey, could you pop the question? He'll never pop the question, right? Because nobody wants to be persuaded. They want to be seduced. I'm going to write that down. Nobody. All right, well, I've enjoyed talking to you all. You're just a super audience, and I look forward to talking to you some more.